Facing an adversary as ruthless as the Kremlin, strategic logic dictates a singular response: inflict systemic cruelty upon the war machine itself. Ukraine has internalized this principle with devastating precision. April 2026 marked a peak in this campaign, a month that shattered records, stretched Russian air defenses to breaking point, and methodically dismantled the energy and military infrastructure funding Moscow's aggression. From the Urals to the Black Sea, an unprecedented wave of long-range strikes set refineries ablaze, crippled export terminals, sank naval assets, and hit the very heart of Russia's defense production. This analysis examines the geography, scale, and strategic implications of the cruelest month Ukraine has yet delivered to the Russian Federation. The defining headline came on May 4th via the Kyiv Post. Over the course of April, Ukrainian long-range drone units successfully struck 14 Russian oil refineries and fuel hubs inside Russia's internationally recognized borders. This was not merely an increase in tempo, it was a step change in operational reach and concentration. Never before had so many Ukrainian munitions found their mark on such a dispersed set of energy targets in a single month. Several facilities were hit multiple times, and the unmanned systems exhibited ranges that extended well beyond 1,500 kilometers. The strike map forms a brutal refinery roll call. Deep in the Russian interior, the Bashneft-Novoil refinery in Ufa, Bashkortostan, lies approximately 100 kilometers from Ukraine. The facility, processing 7 million tons of oil annually into lubricants and specialty products, was left burning. Meanwhile, at the Gorky oil pumping station in Kstovo, Nizhny Novgorod region, a more modest 800 kilometers from the border, drones took out 2 primary refining units. The Kstovo refinery alone handles 17 million tons of oil per year and provides an estimated 30% of Russia's entire gasoline consumption, making it a critical choke point in the domestic fuel supply chain. Nowhere, however, embodied the relentlessness of Ukraine's April campaign more than Tuapse. This refinery on the Black Sea coast suffered strikes on April 16th, April 20th, and April 28th, and then was hit yet again on May 1st. The repeated blows destroyed at least 24 fuel storage tanks and crippled processing units responsible for 4.4% of Russia's total refining output, including Euro 5 standard petroleum products essential for military logistics. Further inland, the Syzran refinery in Samara, requiring a 900-kilometer drone flight, erupted in a massive fire. The same region's Novokuybishevsk refinery, which processes 8.8 million tons of oil per year and produces 20 types of petroleum products, many for military use, was also struck, triggering explosions and a large blaze. The geographic envelope of these attacks stretched ever eastward. In Perm, the Lukoil Perm Nefteorg Syntez refinery, 500 kilometers from Ukraine, saw one of its primary processing units knocked offline by a strike attributed to the Alpha unit of Ukraine's SBU. That facility alone handles 13 million tons of oil per year. Similarly, in Orsk, Orenburg region, drones caused a fire at a refinery with a capacity of 6.6 million tons per year, producing around 30 product types. And in Yaroslavl, roughly 750 kilometers from Ukraine, a vacuum distillation unit at the Yaroslavl refinery, capable of processing 15 million tons annually, and a key producer of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, was torn through. Cumulatively, these strikes represented a systematic dismantling of Russia's refining capacity. Ukraine's April operations did not stop at the refinery gate. The campaign extended to the export terminals that move Russian crude and products to international markets. Primorsk, a critical oil export hub in the Leningrad region, some 850 kilometers from Ukraine, had 3 RVSP 2000 storage tanks damaged, each tank with a volume of 20,000 cubic meters, a total of 60,000 cubic meters of oil storage going up in flames. These strikes followed earlier hits in March, and were followed by yet another drone assault on May 3rd, reigniting fires. UST Luga, Russia's other major Baltic seaport, was similarly targeted. Drones damaged 3 oil tanks, adding to damage sustained in previous weeks. Together, Primorsk and Ust-Luga account for roughly 40% of Russia's total oil exports, and the repeated attacks rendered significant portions of that capacity offline. Other export infrastructure received its share of punishment. The RPK Vysotsk Lukoil 2 oil loading terminal in Leningrad region was struck, causing a fire. In Novorossiysk, now one of the most important remaining ports for Russian Black Sea exports, drones traversed 420 kilometers to hit the Sheskari's oil terminal, igniting yet another blaze that choked off the seaborne flow of oil. In Krasnodar Krai, the Tikhoretsk oil pumping station was also set alight. When combined with strikes on oil depots in Crimea and the broader Krasnodar region, this represented the most brutal monthly campaign against Russian oil infrastructure since the full-scale invasion began. The economic consequences were immediate and severe. On March 12th, the Financial Times had projected Russia could rake in an additional $150 million per day due to sky-high oil prices triggered by the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Instead, by April, Russia was forced to cut exports drastically as its ports burned and the refineries that supply them collapsed. According to RBC Ukraine, Russia's oil exports dropped by 16.8% compared to March, amounting to a 1.8 million ton shortfall. This was precisely the intended effect, to sever the financial arteries that pump money into the Kremlin's war chest. What made April truly novel was the expansion of the strike doctrine to the very source of Russian oil production. On April 10th, the Kiev Independent reported that Ukrainian forces struck 2 ice-resistant drilling platforms in the Caspian Sea, approximately 1,000 kilometers from the front lines. The platforms, stationed at the Yuri Korchagin and V. Grafer oil fields, represented the first such attack on offshore production facilities. This signaled a new link in Ukraine's targeting chain. Beyond refineries and export hubs, upstream extraction assets were now in the crosshairs. The logic is inescapable. By burning crude before it can even be refined, Ukraine is crippling the entire oil supply chain from wellhead to tanker. And tankers themselves are not exempt. On April 29th, Ukrainian drones scored a direct hit on the Marquise tanker, located about 210 kilometers southeast of Tuapse at the time. The vessel was sailing without an automatic identification system signal, a hallmark of the so-called shadow fleet used to evade sanctions. Flying the flag of Cameroon, the tanker was nevertheless well known and under sanctions by the United Kingdom, the European Union, Canada, New Zealand, and Switzerland. Ukraine applied its own kinetic sanctions, disabling the vessel and demonstrating that even maritime logistics moving Russian crude are no longer safe. Parallel to the oil campaign, Ukraine delivered punishing blows to Russia's military-industrial complex. In an operation on April 25th, drones struck the Shagol airfield in the Chelyabinsk region, an extraordinary 700 kilometers from Ukraine. The targets included up to 4 fighter jets, among them a pair of Su-57 stealth fighters. The Su-57 is Russia's most advanced combat aircraft, intended to rival the American F-22 and F-35. The spectacle of these cutting-edge jets burning on the tarmac at an airbase deep inside Russian territory was a humiliation of the highest order, underlining the vulnerability of even the most prestigious defense assets. Meanwhile, Ukraine systematically targeted the factories that sustain Russia's missile and drone warfare. On April 1st, drones struck the Strela plant in the Bryansk border region. This facility builds components for Russian cruise missiles and, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, has fulfilled 120 government contracts to service defense industry needs. The strike was carefully chosen to maximally disrupt the long-range missile barrages that Russia had intensified that very month. 141 missiles and 6,663 drones launched at Ukraine in April, a new monthly record. The message was clear. Russia's ability to replenish its missile stocks is being systematically degraded. Further south in Taganrog, Rostov region, the Ukrainian Navy deployed Neptune missiles against the Atlant Aero plant on April 19th. This site handles the entire production cycle for Molnia strike and reconnaissance drones used extensively on the front lines, and also manufactures components for the Orion drone, Kh-50 missiles, and Kab-20 guided aerial bombs. Satellite imagery and Russian reports confirmed a large warehouse fire, and the use of Neptune missiles, indisputably missile strikes rather than the drone debris. Fiction so often trotted out by Moscow added to the credibility of the attack. By hitting such plants, Ukraine directly undercuts Russia's ability to sustain its high-intensity aerial operations. The Black Sea Fleet, already forced into a posture of distant dispersal, suffered further attrition. In April, Ukrainian strikes took out the Project 775 landing ship Yamal and the Project 1171 Nikolai Filchenkov, with a combined value of 150 million. Both vessels were struck on April 20th and again on April 26th, a double tap ensuring their prolonged removal from service. On April 26th, the Ivan Khurs, a radio reconnaissance center vessel, was hit, along with a fleet training facility. The Project 11356R Burevestnik frigate also fell victim. This class of frigate is capable of carrying caliber cruise missiles that Russia has used extensively against Ukrainian targets. In the Kerch Strait, 2 patrol boats guarding the Kerch Bridge were destroyed, potentially softening defenses for future strikes against that vital logistical artery linking occupied Crimea to the Russian mainland. Finally, on April 22nd, the conning tower of an FSB border patrol ship in Sevastopol was damaged. The cumulative effect of these strikes on Russia's warfighting capacity is amplified by the parallel devastation wrought on frontline forces. Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, reported that the number of strikes in the 20 to 150 kilometer range doubled compared to March and quadrupled relative to February. These mid-range attacks target control centers, logistical convoys, troop concentrations, and storage sites, the connective tissue that enables Russian assaults. When air defense systems in occupied territories are destroyed, aerial corridors open up, enabling more strikes both in the near rear and deep inside Russia. The human cost for Russia has been staggering. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Russia suffered approximately 35,000 casualties in April alone, a figure on par with the record-breaking 35,351 of March, and matching the previous high of 35,000 in December. This marked the fifth consecutive month in which Russian battlefield losses exceeded the number of new recruits funneled into the army. United 24 media calculated that between December and April, verified drone strikes alone had cost Russia 156,735 soldiers against 148,400 recruits in the same period. When artillery and unrecorded strikes are factored in, the 5-month casualty figure likely exceeds 160,000. The math is simple and devastating. Russia is losing forces faster than it can replenish them. This convergence of long-range oil infrastructure strikes, military-industrial sabotage, naval losses, and frontline attrition reveals a strategic coherence that extends beyond tactical opportunism. By simultaneously attacking the economic engine, oil revenues, the means of production, factories and shipyards, the delivery systems, tankers and warships, and the human capital, troop concentrations, Ukraine is executing a multi-domain dismantling of Russian hard power. The geographic spread from the Caspian Sea to the Baltic, from the Urals to the Black Sea, strains Russian air defenses beyond any allocation logic. The fact that drones reached Chelyabinsk, Perm, and Orsk demonstrates that no rear area is immune, forcing Russia to spread its limited air defense assets thinner still, leaving gaps both on the front lines and over critical infrastructure. The economic consequences will compound over time. Refineries have long repair cycles. Storage tanks and pumping stations cannot be replaced overnight. The 16.8% drop in oil exports in a single month, amidst a period when global prices should have been generating a windfall, represents billions of dollars in lost revenue. The shadow fleet, already operating under heavy sanctions, now faces kinetic destruction. Russia's shipbuilding industry, crippled by sanctions on specialized components, cannot easily replace lost landing ships or frigates. The Su-57 fleet, small in number and reliant on Western electronics smuggled through third countries, takes a major blow. Every production line disrupted is a missile or drone that cannot be launched. Perhaps most critically, the strategic psychology has shifted. The Kremlin has long used its geographic depth as a shield, projecting an image of invulnerability in the interior while waging war on the periphery. April's strikes eviscerated that pretense. The burning refineries and airfield tarmacs deep in the heartland send a domestic signal that the war is not a distant adventure, but a direct threat to Russia's economic stability. The continued loss of warships and the degradation of the Kerch Strait defenses erode the foundation of the unsinkable aircraft carrier that Crimea was supposed to represent. In sum, April 2026 will be remembered as a watershed month in the Russo-Ukrainian War. Ukraine delivered destruction on a scale, at a range, and with a coordinated intent that redefines the conflict's geography. The oil supply chain was attacked at every stage: extraction, refining, and export. Critical defense plants were neutralized. Frontline forces were decimated at rates recruitment cannot offset. The combined effect is a slow but accelerating unspooling of the Russian war machine from the factory floor to the frontline trench. The West's provision of extended-range munitions and Ukraine's own rapidly maturing drone industry have created a new reality. Russia's strategic depth is no longer a sanctuary, but a vulnerability. April was the cruelest month for Moscow, yet as the operational tempo continues to rise, it may soon be regarded not as a peak, but as a turning point toward an even more punishing phase of the war.